Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us as we talk about Grant Writing 101 for higher ed. With my favorite tagline, get the funding you deserve, which I think is very important, and a source of funding that not too many people take advantage of. But of course, we're here today with Bob, who's going to talk to us more about how to leverage those sources. Dr. Blondin is joining us from Clark State College. Thank you, Dr. Blondin. And we're excited to dive into the topic today. I am not the normal moderator for an Enrollify webinar, so you're used to seeing Mallory up here. She was unfortunately held back by some travel setbacks. I think she's stuck in Chicago right now, I believe. So sending good thoughts to Mallory to make it home safe and sound. And thank you, Mallory, for letting me take your spot here as moderator. My name is Kelly, and I'm on the Element 451 team. So let's get started. Okay, we're going to start with introductions. I'm going to pass it off to Bob. Bob, do you want to share a little bit about yourself with everyone?
Hi, Bob Vistas. I'm the president of Workforce Institute, and I'm located in Portland, Oregon. And I've been doing grant writing all the way back to 1980, which just means I'm an old guy. And I've worked with lots of different organizations over the years, Dr. Blondin and Clark State being one of them. So more about me as we go through this.
Yeah, so my name is Jo Blondin. I've been president at Clark State for 11 years. Prior to that, I was chancellor of Arkansas Tech's Ozark campus for 7 years. However, my background is I'm an English professor by training. But I'm deeply invested in workforce development and economic opportunity for our students. I've worked at both 4- and 2-year institutions, but I've been at Clark State for the past 11 years. We have worked very closely with both Kelly in other IT capacities, and then, of course, with Bob as a grant writer. In fact, when I first got to Clark State, we got our first TAC 4 grant, round 4 grant, with Bob's help, $2.5 million in 2014. And from there, we've taken off and we've received upwards of about $20 million in federal grant monies and a little bit of state money there. But really excited to be with everybody today. Thank you for including me.
Okay, so just a couple housekeeping things before we get started. This will be a 45-minute webinar with Q&A to follow. The recording will be available tomorrow for review. Please feel free to utilize the chat. It's set to everyone to send in all your questions. I'll be moderating the chat throughout the webinar. And so I will interrupt if I think that the question is good to interrupt Bob and Dr. Blondin with. So we'll get started. Bob, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. So today's agenda, we're going to basically go through and talk about various funding sources. We're going to take a look at what proposal development processes you should use, the whole process of submitting the proposal, notification and contract negotiations, and then working with foundations. And we'll do Q&A along the way as well as at the end. So let's move on. So in terms of the funding sources, what we'll cover today are going to be the federal government agencies. We'll look at local or state government agencies and some things you can do there. Other funding sources that are out there, we're going to get into the foundations a little bit and then other funding strategies. So the major funding sources from the feds are Department of Education, Department of Labor, Department of Defense, Commerce, National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, EPA, and then Economic Development Administration. And Economic Development Administration over the past several years has been the big cross-cutting one with lots of money available for projects at the local level as well as at the regional level. So this is a slide that I found probably 30 years ago that I think is just a great representation of going from what you're thinking about to getting it funded and the steps along the way. So typically, as the grant seeker, there's three different things you might be looking at: better services, better products, better capabilities. What can you do to strengthen your organization? Are there new programs you want to create? Are there some things that you're really great at that you want to do? And as you figure out what it is you want to go after, there's brainstorming involved. And that brainstorming has to come to one of two different outcomes. You're either going to no-go or you're going to go for it. And if you're going to go for it, you kind of go from there. Dr. Blondin, was that a comment?
I'm going to be the Dick Vitale and provide some color in this broadcast. So absolutely, this is an important part of the process, especially to bring in your mission. So it's absolutely essential that the leadership around a grant proposal, whether it's the president or a vice president, deans, faculty, staff, et cetera, students for that matter, we want to make sure that we're always keeping in mind what the mission of the college is and how that could also forward the mission. So that's the big overarching piece that you really need to think about, because a lot of grant opportunities come your way every single day, and you really need a sieve, if you will, and your mission is a good sieve for that. So that's just what I would throw in there, Bob. Thanks.
Does it fit into your mission? I think that's the big thing. And we'll get into that more as we get into the presentation, but that's a great point to bring up at this time. So, in terms of the different funding that's out there, so if you're looking for funding from a federal agency, you want to go to grants.gov, and you want to go there probably on a daily basis to look at the various things that there's funding for. As Dr. Blondin just said, there's lots of things that are coming down. And the thing is, you want to only look at the ones that tie into the mission of the organization. If it doesn't tie in, you don't want to necessarily look at it. In terms of identification of funding sources, so on the federal side, go to grants.gov. Let's say you find something that you're really interested in. On grants.gov, you can obtain the announcement and the guidelines. And from there, you basically would be going through it. Now, if it's a federal grant, the guidelines, the full guidelines for the proposal are probably going to be somewhere between 50 and 70 pages long. What you want to do is off the one-page announcement regarding the funding on grants.gov, you want to read, who's qualified to go after it, what the purpose of the funding is. That should help set the stage. If you decide that this is something that you're going to do for that particular funding, then it comes down to writing the proposal, submitting the proposal. We'll get into these steps as we go through the webinar today. And then you get down to notification and negotiation. If you get notified that you're funded, that's a great thing. Then you look at how are we going to operate it. If you get notified you're not funded, what you really need to do is reassess and revise. For federal programs especially, figure every year that funding may be there. So if you struck out this year, you want to find out what you didn't do right and then go back and take a shot. But you've got a whole year to plan for it. So that's an important part of it. Let's go on.
And Bob, before we go to the next slide, Sean had a question about, can you write a grant for anything or only specific needs? And I thought that would be good for framing as we continue the webinar.
And I guess my question back would be, what are you thinking in terms of anything? Are we talking operating funds for an organization? Usually you can't go after operating funds in and of themselves. You could go after some operating funds as part of a proposal that was specific. So I'll try to cover this a little bit more as we go through it.
And I would also say too, back to the mission piece of this, you really need to, you're doing a scan, you have a strategic plan as a college. And if you don't, start there. But as a college, looking at your strategic plan and where you want to grow, let me just give a really quick example. So one of our number one goal is, of course, to have the most responsive, best academic and workforce programs to meet our students and employers' needs. That's goal number one, right? And so one of those areas, employers came to us, and in Ohio, we have just suffered and struggled through this addiction epidemic. I mean, it's been devastating all across the state and, of course, across the country. But how are we going to deal with this from a workforce perspective? Because health is both a workforce issue, addiction's a workforce issue, but it's also a training issue to help with workers who might need this. So we looked at a number of grants and went through Department of Health and Human Services to kind of jumpstart at the federal level, peer recovery specialist short-term certificate at the very beginning. So I'm happy to talk about that a little bit further. But I would say to Sean's question, you can go after anything, but specificity and detail and desire for what you want to fix or change or address or augment is absolutely essential to the work that you're doing.
And Dr. Blondin, I'm glad you used that example because I was going to ask you to pull that in a little bit later in the presentation. So let's move on to the next slide if we can. So one of the things that you want to make sure that you're doing is you've identified the project. Now you need to look at what it ties into. So what are the strategic plans? So federal government agencies, state agencies, one of the things that you'd be looking at, for example, right now on the federal side, is you'd be looking at Economic Development Administration. Economic Development Administration, what the plans are for your region, and looking at what were the identified key industries, key sectors. What are the things that they want to work on? And so that would be something I would strongly suggest you look at in terms of, especially if it's workforce related. If it's workforce related at the state level, you want to look at the governor's workforce development plan. Look at what the governor has specified as the key industries, the key sectors. And when you're writing the proposal, you want to be able to cite both of those documents. You want to be able to cite what EDA is saying, because that substantiates what you want to do. And you furthermore want to cite what the governor is saying. And then you may also be looking at the governor's strategic plan for economic development for the state so that you can tie it all together and put a bow on it. So tying it further, local economic development. So when, I've worked with Dr. Blondin on a number of different things. So for example, we look at what the Dayton Area Chamber of Commerce has done. We look at the Greater Springfield Partnership, which is their chamber, look at what they're trying to do, and then look at how that ties into whatever the project may be. So several years ago, Dr. Blondin was looking at putting together a new Bachelor of Applied Science in computer areas, and it was both the front end in IT and the back end. And it was called Full Stack IT Development. And they were critical partners to work with in terms of identification of how that ties into the needs. And thank you, Dr. Blondin, Web Design and Development. I forgot that, the title. But that was very critical. The other thing that was critical then was talking to the companies that were in that arena. And we were able to gather them all together, talk to them about it. The chambers were involved in it. And off of that, we were able to get their letters of support and them telling us what we should do in putting together that application. And that application was approved by the state of Ohio. So go ahead.
I would also add too that, those partnership meetings are so much more than just because you want partnerships to be mutually beneficial, obviously. And you don't want to be the college or the institution or the organization that only calls people in when you want them. You want to make sure that this is a long and well-developed relationship. So we had some programs to build on with this, but we also asked questions like, how much would you pay if they graduated with this curriculum? What would you pay our graduates? How can we ensure that we have the highest quality? Will you have some of your employees serve as subject matter experts? So there are a lot of opportunities within the grant writing process to create the infrastructure you need for the program, successful or not. Let's say you don't get funded. I mean, you still have these great relationships and they're a good springboard for the future. So I think that sometimes in grant writing, there are some unexpected, opportunities, even if you don't get funded. So I just want to kind of keep that out there because Bob really lifted that up with that program. And there's some others too that we've gone for and not gotten, but have developed the relationships like with National Advanced Air Mobility. So anyway, thanks.
Well, and to Dr. Blondin's point there, one of the things that you really want to do as you're going through the process, you have to also be willing to say, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think this is a good thing to go with. And we had one where we were looking at transportation about a year ago, and Dr. Blondin wisely said, I think we just have to put this on the back burner because it just is not fitting into what we originally wanted to do.
Right. Just very quickly, I wanted to create a bachelor's degree, which had as its kernel, its first stackable certificate, this CDL program, the truck driver training program, thinking this would be a great way to add logistics and do other things. But the industry came together and they were very clear over the course of 6 months. Blondin, we like what you're doing. The CDL program is good. You have other pathways if people want to get an associate's or a bachelor's degree. Cool it. And so we did. So I think listening to your industry partners too, not coming in with a predetermined idea of what's going to happen, coupled with accepting the outcome, but also it really strengthened our partnerships with those industry partners in our region, particularly around our CDL program. It's never been more highly enrolled in the past 11 years. So I'm excited. Thanks.
So the last bullet point here is partnerships and collaborative efforts with community-based organizations or nonprofits. So let's say that what we're trying to do is we're trying to put together a proposal that would be like the one that Dr. Blondin had, that was the opioid related piece. So you want to hook up with mental health. You might want to hook up with other entities that would be part of that. You may want to hook up with organizations that are involved in alcohol and drug addiction. But at the same point in time, you may want to hook up with supportive services agencies that can provide the necessary supports to the people as they come through the programs. So let's move ahead. One of the things you have to realize as you're putting it together are the resources that you have internally within your organization to be able to put together a project. What can you bring to the table in terms of human resource, plant resources, and fiscal resources? And then this last bullet point, this is critical. It doesn't matter what funding source you go to, they all want to know what is your sustainability plan for keeping a program running when the requested funds are gone. That also could go to how are you going to maintain the staff that you've hired who are part of the grant application you're putting in. Let's go ahead. So in identifying the specific project, first thing you have to understand is what's the purpose of the project? How does it tie into the organization? How does it tie into the mission? Who is your target audience? So is your target audience low-income folks who may be in need of getting an employment that will help them get to a high-wage, high-demand occupation? what makes your project unique and different? And that's an important thing because run of the mill does not get funded. What gets funded is something that's cutting edge, that can be replicated, a variety of different things. Can you do the project alone, or do you need other partners? And if we need other partners, who are they and what role would they play in it? Moving on.
And Bob, I would add to this as well. You can keep on this slide, that's fine. But I would also add to this that I would look at the history of funding of these projects as well. I mean, make sure that you're looking, let's say, at past Department of Labor Strengthening Community Colleges grants. We just got the notice that we did not receive one, and I'm not happy about the fact that we didn't receive it. But that means that we asked for the comments. We want to improve our proposal. It was around nursing and healthcare. It was kind of a unique, and sometimes even the really innovative programs don't get funded because they're too different. They blow people's minds. Let me recall a proposal in 2020, 2021 that we put together for strengthening community colleges, and then one for GOL. It didn't get funded twice, which was a peer recovery specialist across Appalachia, delivered virtually and during the pandemic. You would think that makes a lot of sense. But guess what? It was just probably very difficult for some of the reviewers to understand. So I think there's a spectrum, and I would really recommend that you do your research, your grant writers do their research about what has been funded, just so you can kind of study those projects. And it doesn't hurt. I mean, if somebody called me and said, how did you get your H-1B grant on laser materials processing funded? I can tell you. And then we've gotten more funding as a result. A total of about $8 million. Just got another 1.3 million from Department of Defense to continue this work. So I think that there's a spectrum of innovation, and you've got to be in a sweet spot.
And, the other point along the lines of that are, when you go after, especially Department of Labor money, they will indicate the sectors a lot of times that they're really interested in, but they basically tell you you can go after any sector or industry as long as you can justify it. And so I ended up working on one in that last competition, Dr. Blondin, and I didn't get funded either on the one I worked on, but it was specifically for tourism and hospitality, which for the location and the college that went after the grant, that is their biggest sector. And actually, they've got 45% of the workforce in this county that are in tourism and hospitality. And I think that it will come back when we get the reviewer comments that they didn't think tourism hospitality was appropriate. But these were for mid-level management positions where they would be going in making $50,000 to $65,000 a year. So you just never know. So in terms of putting the proposal together, you need the mission and purpose of the organization. Financial status will be something you'll be asked by the funding source. The strategic directions and plan. So Clark State, what is the strategic direction that's been set by the board and Dr. Blondin? And then biographical information on board and your directors and trustees. I would only tell you need that if you're a nonprofit and you're probably going to be going after funding from a foundation because you want to look at connectivity with the foundation. All of the grant that you're going to respond to, they're going to want to know your experience in operating grant-funded programs and projects, and then identify if there's any special circumstances that you need to be addressing as part of this. Let's move on. Yeah.
I want to answer a question from C. McLaughlin here. How do colleges typically maintain that funding once the grant runs out? I know we're going to talk a little bit about this a little later, but do they have to have the funding secure, or is it assumed that the funding will continue if the project goes well as it's planned? Actually, you have to have a sustainability plan as part of your grant. Let me give you a quick example. So Clark State received a Title III grant, Student Support Services Title III grant from the Department of Education in the late 2019, early 2020. It was to lift up and fully embrace as a college trauma-informed practice. It was about $1.1 million. We hired 3 staff members as part of that. And guess what? We have in this is the last year, we have absorbed 3 staff members as part of that. We had to create a step down sustainability plan. So in the first year, they were 100% funded. In the second year, they were 66% funded. In the third year, they were 33% funded. And this year, we took them on totally. So you do need to have a sustainability plan, because the worst thing that can happen, and I've been part of these, it's happened on my campuses over the years, and I've seen it. But when you hear, oh, that grant, that was just a grant. It was soft money. Soft money can become hard money if you prioritize. If you as a college and the leadership prioritizes it, you can also say, you know what, that didn't work. But at the same time, I think that there are a host of reactions to this. So anyway, thank you.
So the next piece you have to look at is writing and developing the proposal. You really, at this point in time, have to go through the request for proposal, the solicitation for grant application, or they're now calling them funding opportunity announcements. And you have to totally understand what's written in there, how it applies to what it is that you want to do. And then you need to develop program goals and design the project. For a lot of federal proposals now, you may be required to develop a logic model. And that logic model gives you the goals and the whole theory behind what it is you're trying to do. So let's move on. Pre-organization, this is a very important point. One of the things that you need to do is look at what the technical requirements are. So Department of Labor, the technical requirement is that you have to use a format that is 1-inch margins, 12-point font, double spaced, 25 pages total, which means that you've got a total of 12.5 pages if it was single spaced. The other thing is they're now specifying with Department of Labor, the only font they want used is Times New Roman. And so you've got, if you don't do that, you're not doing the technical requirement. They could kick you out just for that. Or if you, as you're going through, when you're doing the proposal, you accidentally do something and you end up with several paragraphs that end up being single spaced versus double spaced, they could literally kick those paragraphs out of your response. So you want to understand that, you want to gather all the information you can internally of what you need, and then who's going to be involved in writing the grant. Are you going to have admin involved? Are you going to have faculty involved? Putting together a proposal outline. This is easy because in each one of those RFPs or FOAs, they are going to give you the scoring criteria, and they're going to tell you section by section what's required. There'll be a needs section. There'll be a project design section. There'll be, basically an administrative section that looks at what your prior experiences are, what is your financial capability and capacity, what's the organization's management capability. So all of those things end up going into your proposal outline. When I put it together, I do the proposal outline, and then I keep the points for each one of those sections and the subsections in, so that when I'm writing the response, I'm playing to the points, because you want to maximize your points. And then what's the timeline to complete and submit the proposal? Let's go ahead. So the needs statement. Why is the project needed? What gap will be filled by it? Will the project address any emerging community need or future needs? So in this section, you'd also be putting in, if it was a workforce training type program, you'd be putting in labor market information. You'd be putting in demographic information that you get from the American Community Survey that talks about the demographics of the population you're going to be serving or the region. And then any emerging community or future need, well, that could very well be something you pulled out of the EDA regional plan, the Chamber of Commerce's plan, the governor's plan, and you weave it all back together. So you could be looking at new technology, the tie to economic development, enhancing the talent development pipeline, which are several of the examples that Dr. Blondin gave earlier. So defining the project, what's the purpose of it? Who's going to benefit from it? How will they benefit from the project? What is the impact going to be in social community impacts? And what's the economic impact of the project? Does the project produce a return on investment being made by the funding source? So one of the agencies I used to work for way back in the day, I started my career in voc rehab. And the agency I worked for was very, very successful in getting foundation funding. And they created a process that kind of ties into this, where they talked about the number of people who went through training and then went to work. And out of the number of people that went to work, they knew that they were placing roughly 2,000 people a year. And the 2,000 people they were placing on average back then were probably making about $12 an hour. They also knew that on average they were working 40 hours a week. We were able to calculate out what the total income earned from those folks would be in a year's period of time. We were then able to take what the lowest federal tax rate was, the lowest state tax rate was, and we could literally speak to these individuals brought this much back in terms of taxes into the local economies. They also brought in this much in spending power in the wages they earned. We ended up telling foundations that story, and as God is my witness, every one of those foundations ended up giving us awards for the various programs, and nobody had ever done it. So think about that within, let's say, a community college. If you know how many people from the college end up going to work, and you're able to track what they're able to get in terms of wage, you can do that same thing. And you can literally talk to the return on investment that's being made. So let's move ahead. So the organization's knowledge of the program, this is Dr. Blondin's example before on opioids. Clark State knew what that issue was. Clark State, their region, that was the epicenter of the whole opioid fentanyl issue that was going on. It was considered one of the biggest problem areas in the country. And so Clark State took that on and they were addressing it and what could be done. Depicting the staff's experience in dealing with it, Dr. Blondin's got some great people on her faculty who understand this issue, and they're tied into the local addiction community, and they've worked really hard on making sure that this worked. That was critical in writing that proposal, that they were involved from day one in the whole process. And this is another one where how is it going to be funded and that self-sufficiency attained. Let's go ahead. Preparing the budget. So I know this is a slide that's difficult to see, but when you do a budget, one of the things that you have to look at are the various categories, and this is based on federal in this budget example. So the key categories are personnel. So the first one's salaries, personnel, fringe benefits, travel, and then equipment. And so all of those are things that were in this example. You have to lay out who you're going to hire, what they're going to do, what their annual salary is, what the FTE is, what the fringes are, all those various things. So one of the things I do is I do a spreadsheet. This is an example of an actual spreadsheet that I've done. And what I try to do is build it so that the reviewer can look at it, and off of the spreadsheet, they're basically getting the budget narrative. And it's a time-saving step versus just doing a narrative that's not tied into a spreadsheet. So let's go on. Follow up on the funding. First thing is, when you follow up, you're going to either do it by telephone. Now it's more prevalent, email. Do not be a pest. So, I've got one individual that I work with and have on and off for the last 20 years who, if the federal agency said that they're going to notify you tomorrow, that's when they'll release who's getting funded, she would call today. And then if they don't release it tomorrow, she would be calling them or emailing them every day. Don't do that. Wait a week. Take your time in doing it. Lots of things come up with the various agencies. Let's go on. So there's no truer statement than this first bullet. So you find out you've been funded. It's called the happy sad dance. You're really happy you got funded. And then about 30 seconds later, it's, oh my God, we got funded. Now we've got to do this. I've got to do all these various things. And so really, as soon as you find out you got funded, the work really needs to start. There's no sitting back. There's no waiting. You want to ask them for a letter of intent. You want to ask for the contracting package if there's a separate one. You want to make sure you notify everybody internally about the award. Immediately, you want to get involved in the hiring process and the purchasing process. Within your organizations how long it takes to hire a person. How long it takes to purchase things, especially a lot of equipment. And so you don't want to lose a minute of time. You want to start it immediately. And in terms of the hiring, you also want to have somebody who is identified as the interim, who's going to be the project director until such time as you hire a project director.
Bob, I want to jump in here too, because there are a lot of considerations that folks may not realize when you're thinking about a grant. So I put the comment about stakeholders in there, and get the stakeholders in early. But let me just share that if you're talking about a new program, you're going to need to involve your accrediting agency. Okay.
Yes.
Or a program specific accrediting agency, if it's nursing or physical therapy or so, there are a lot of considerations that you need to make, and you need to build in those costs. All right. You also need to think about making sure you're finding the worst. In my opinion, the worst thing that, back to the happy sad dance, that can happen is you get the grant and your finance people were like, what was the budget? Our fringe benefits are, we count 33% and you just put in 10%. We can't pay this person. You have to have all the stakeholders involved. And it's important. You may think you're getting too many. You can weed out, but especially as you kind of go through the process and work with people. But I know at my college, I've got 6,000 students. I've got, 600 faculty and staff, 280 of them are full-time. We're not a huge campus. We should be able to work together on these things. And the last thing I want is that our director of facilities to say, you've committed to putting the manufacturing lab where? There's a wooden floor there. You need concrete. Did this happen? Yes, it happened in 2015. So please get the people you don't think should be involved. If you're going to buy software, get your IT people involved, because they're going to say, that's not compatible with our LMS or that, or our learning management system or our enterprise system. Why would you go out and buy this when I could have given you advice and I could negotiate, because your IT people can also negotiate rates and things, so please involve everybody, even if you think you're overdoing it, it's okay.
And Dr. Blondin gave you a live example of that floor. That was the TACT grant that was funded. It was nice that we were able to get well over $1 million worth of needed equipment and to really move into advanced manufacturing. But the equipment people who designated what they needed never looked at the floor piece. And the floor piece was, fortunately, there was a source that Dr. Blondin could go to be able to cover the cost. But you need to know those things.
Yeah, it's called our reserves.
Yeah. Yes.
And it
So
cost about $100,000 for us to do this. So we were excited about a 2.5 million grant, but then it's like, it's really a $2.4 million grant. And then it's so you want to make sure that you're building all those costs in and call it beginners, I mean, that's what we were kind of beginners in that time. So anyway, I know we were a little bit short on time, so I want to make sure we get through our slides, but thanks.
But even as a seasoned grant writer and having done this for years, that was something I had never experienced, was looking at something like, do the floors work for where you want to put this? So my learning curve was, ever since then, whenever I'm working on a grant, no matter who the customer is, I ask that question. Is this facility that you're looking at actually going to work? So you want to schedule contract negotiations, get that letter of intent, and get everything rolling. Let's go ahead. So if you weren't successful, you want to ask for the reasons, you want to get the reviewer comments, you want to see if you can have a conference call to discuss the proposal. And if you can get feedback from them regarding strengthening it, that would be great. Although you're more likely to get that at the local level or state level than you are at the federal level, where they'll give you the feedback. And also, don't be disappointed when you get back feedback from the federal agencies that you didn't get funded, because basically they don't give you a whole lot of detail. They just say that, this is where you were in terms of points in an area. Let's go ahead. So let's jump into foundations very quickly. Foundations are a little bit different. Foundations, to be quite honest, are a lot easier. There's a lot more research involved. But a foundation proposal may take you 8 to 12 hours to do, whereas a federal proposal might take you 200 hours to do. So with the foundations, you want to research the foundations. You can do it through the foundation library. You can do it through Candid. There's a variety of different sources. You want to identify the funding sources that match your needs. You want to know if the foundation has any geographic restrictions or other things. You want to look at the deadlines. And then this last point, you really have to do this. Look at the dollar range of grants. I cannot tell you the number of nonprofits I've worked for that want to ask somebody for a $100,000 grant, and they've been told this is the foundation you should go to, and they never look to see what they've funded in the past, and the foundation's never given over, let's say, $10,000 to anybody. So if they've never given more than $10,000, you are not going to be asking them for $100,000, because that'll probably get you an automatic rejection. So look at that dollar range of grants. Going on. Applying should be easy. Most of these are done online now. The second bullet point is really important. If you're doing it online, odds are it's on a timer And if you're unaware of the timer, you could end up filling out the entire grant, and then you go to hit submit and it's not there because you got timed out 7 hours ago. And I learned this the hard way. And not once, but twice. And so now I never start out putting anything in unless I've done it all in Word. And in Word, I've got the document, so I'm just going to cut and paste. I can get it in there in under an hour's time. And as I put in a section, I'm saving it if I can. The other things that you want to make sure of is that you understand the word or character limitations that foundation has. And then you want to, when you put it in Word, look at the character or word limitations. Realize that there's a big difference if it's character limitations, that you have one space or two spaces between a sentence, because for every time it's two spaces, you're losing one potentially, and then you're not able to say something. So you cut and paste it in. You then have to go back and look to make sure that when it converted, that you didn't lose like the last sentence or two or part of the last sentence due to those counts. So let's go on. What you want to do is create a prospect worksheet. In the old days, I used to have 2 copies of every foundation worksheet I would do. One was for my employer. The other one was for me, because I wanted to know what they were doing. And I wouldn't have to go back if I was doing consulting for somebody or joined another organization. You want to know what they provide support for, if they've got those limits, the types of recipients. So you want to look at what they've funded in the past, the population they serve. Now, here's where the people play into it. So let's say I want to go after some funds from the Cleveland Foundation, for example. I would look at who was on the board of the Cleveland Foundation. Then I would look to, if when I was at the nonprofit there, I would look to who on our board might have a relationship with somebody on the Cleveland Foundation board, and then use that to get the intro or to get it in front of the board. And then look at these other things, and the board meeting dates are going to be important because that's typically when they would fund. Let's go on. Key board members, I've already said that, the linkages. Let's go on. So foundations typically fund in their geographic region or location. They do not want to fund a project that's flash in the pan. They don't want to give you funding for 1 year to help you do something, and then the next year you've moved on to something else and you're just not caring about it. They want to see the continuum that's there. They want to see how it fits into your overall strategic plan. Then corporate foundations typically are looking at where their offices are located. Let's go on. And we're almost done. Foundations do not like to fund a project that they have not talked to you about. They don't want, and in the old days, they used to be greatly insulted if you sent them a proposal and you hadn't talked to it first. Like, you want my money, but you don't have the respect to talk to me. So kind of keep that in the back of your minds, and you want to do things with them and talk things through. Let's go on.
And Bob, I would just add too, with foundation and the grants alike, it goes without saying today, the data is everything. And being able to prove your a concept with data. So for example, you want to train X% of the workforce, or you want this number of individuals in your region to realize a goal of going from $25 to $30 an hour, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, you need the data behind it, whether it's labor market statistics, your own institutional data and research, et cetera. So I can't underestimate the importance of data in both foundation proposals as well as any kind of state or federal or local grants for that matter. Thank you.
So in terms of the foundation proposals, you want to get in front of the project officer. You want to have serious discussions with them. You want to invite them to your organization. One thing you can do with the foundation, you can invite them to lunch and pick up the bill. You cannot do that with a federal agency, a state agency, or a local government agency. And then you want to do whatever you can to kind of make them your best friend and ask them questions. Let's go on. Foundation proposals. Here's where it's really different. 1-page executive summary, proposals typically 3 to 5 pages, a 1-page budget, a 1-page budget narrative, relevant attachments. And with foundations, once you've got 1 or 2 proposals written along the lines of what it is you're trying to accomplish with them, it makes it very easy to continue to send in applications. Let's go ahead. Typically, they have either annual deadlines, semi-annual, or quarterly. Quarterly's become a little more prevalent of late. Questions. So one last thing I want to reiterate is the whole process of asking questions of the various agencies. So with a federal agency or state agency, any government agency, as soon as they let the proposal, and soon as it's published and it's open for you to apply, they cannot really answer a lot of your questions. They can't talk to you about program design. They can't talk to you about what they're really wanting. And so you want to look at what you can do with them discussion-wise beforehand. So for the example of the Strengthening Community College grants, so Dr. Blondin didn't get funded, the one I put in didn't get funded. We know they're going to do them again. Let's try to have some discussions with them about, okay, what was it that really made this not work? What could we do differently the next time? They can respond to those things. Foundations, same thing, except with the foundation, they can answer your questions. A foundation can tell you, this is what we really want to see. And what can you do? What can we do to help you get there? So that's something that if you're going to do the foundation route, really try to make them your best friend. Talk to them a lot. So I'm going to shut up and let's, are there some questions?
Yeah, feel free to use the everyone option in the chat to ask any questions. So far, we've answered everything along the way.
I will say this, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about this issue and grants and how I can be of service. I'm putting my email in the chat if somebody wants to connect with me, or my grant, more importantly, my grant writer or somebody on campus. So I just want to say thank you so much for including me. And Bob has been a great partner for us. And of course, Kelly is somebody I've worked with over the years, and I have the utmost confidence and really enjoy working with. So I feel honored to be here today.
Dr. Blondin, thank you for joining us. As always, it's a pleasure to work with you.
So thank you everyone for your time today. I appreciate it. Thank you to our panelists, especially, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Kelly, thank you for putting everything together. Thank you for everybody for attending.
Guys, accidentally, I just put mine only to the hosts, which you guys know.
Yep.
Or connect with me on LinkedIn. That's helpful too. If I can spell it right too. Thank you. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.